My stepmother constantly hounded me about moving out. She went berserk when I told her who actually owned it. Can you even imagine finding out the home you've lived in your entire life, the one your mother left you, was secretly yours all along, while your stepmother was actively trying to kick you out and bulldoze every single memory of your mom? Because that's exactly what happened to me. And let me tell you, it completely turned my world upside down. Can you even imagine finding out the home you've lived in your entire life, the one your mother left you, was secretly yours all along, while your stepmother was actively trying to kick you out and bulldoze every single memory of your mom? Because that's exactly what happened to me. And let me tell you, it completely turned my world upside down. Story asterisk. It all started 4 years ago. My dad married Nancy. I was 22, still living in the house where I'd grown up, the house my mom had inherited from her parents. She passed away when I was 17, and Dad and I just stayed. It was paid off, and he said it made sense for me to finish college there. What he never told me, what he deliberately hid, was that Mom had actually left the house to me in her will. He was just living there as my guardian until I turned 25. I had no idea. Absolutely none. When Nancy moved in, it was like a hurricane ripped through our quiet life. She immediately started tearing through the house, calling it stuck in the past, saying it desperately needed updating. She ripped down Mom's custom-sewn curtains. My heart ached watching them go. She painted over the beautiful murals Mom had lovingly done in the hallway. Can you believe it? And then she replaced every single piece of furniture with cold, modern stuff from some ridiculously overpriced store. And my dad? He just let her. He said Nancy needed to feel comfortable in her new home. Comfortable? She turned Mom's craft room, a space filled with so many happy memories of us creating things together, into her personal gym. The guest room? That became a walk-in closet just for her shoes. 6 months in, Nancy dropped her first bomb. "When are you planning to move out?" she asked, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "You're old enough to be independent. It's weird for newlyweds to have an adult child hanging around." I was still in college, barely scraping by with a part-time coffee shop job. I told her I couldn't afford rent. Her response? A cold shrug. "That's not my problem. Maybe you should get a real job." And Dad? He just sat there. Silent. The apartment listings started appearing on my bed every week. Always circled were the cheapest, sketchiest places an hour from campus. At dinner, she'd say things, barbed comments about how she was living alone by my age, how I expected to grow up if Daddy was still taking care of me. It was relentless. By the second year, her tactics got even more aggressive. She'd change the locks and conveniently forget to give me a new key. I'd be stranded outside, sometimes for hours, waiting for someone to come home. "It's practice for when you have your own place," she'd chirp. She even put a lock on the refrigerator, claiming I was basically a tenant and needed to buy my own food. Then came the rent, $1,200 a month, which she insisted was teaching me responsibility. Dad just nodded along, a silent accomplice. My stomach churned every time. At family dinners, she'd parade me around like some sad exhibit, telling everyone I was refusing to launch, scared of the real world. My relatives started asking me why I was still living at home. And Nancy would chime in before I could even open my mouth, her voice dripping with fake concern. It was humiliating. Then, I finally graduated college. And Nancy, in her infinite generosity, threw me a party. Not a graduation party, oh no, a moving out party. There was a banner that read, "Finally flying solo." She'd invited all her friends, all her family. And the kicker? She'd already hired a moving truck for the very next day. During the party, she gave this grand speech about how proud she was that I was finally becoming an adult and moving forward with my life. She'd even picked out paint colors for my room, her new meditation space. I hadn't even found an apartment yet. I had just started my new job a week before. You have 30 days, she declared, and that's generous. She started packing my things while I was at work. I'd come home to my room filled with boxes labeled things like kitchen stuff for new apartment and decorations for your own place. All of Mom's cherished belongings, things I'd carefully saved, ended up in boxes marked storage unit because, according to Nancy, you can't take everything to a studio apartment. 3 weeks into my 30-day eviction notice, Nancy sat Dad and me down for a house meeting. She'd drawn up elaborate plans to renovate the entire house once I was gone. Knock down walls, add a pool, completely gut the kitchen Mom had designed. It's time to make this house truly theirs, she said, her eyes gleaming. Instead of living in your mother's shadow. She actually used those words. My dad just nodded along, his gaze fixed on her. She'd already met with contractors, showed us estimates, $300,000. She planned to use Dad's retirement savings and take out a loan against the house. She'd even made appointments with banks. Once you move out next week, she chirped, construction starts immediately. That's when I finally told her. My voice felt surprisingly steady despite the hurricane brewing inside me. You can't take a loan against this house, Nancy, I said. Because the house is mine. Mom left it to me in her will. I inherited it officially on my 25th birthday, which is in 2 months. Dad is just staying here as a courtesy from me. Nancy laughed. She actually laughed. You're delusional, she sneered. I pulled out Mom's will, which I'd quietly gotten from the lawyer a week before after starting to ask questions about Nancy's renovation obsession. Nancy took it. She read it once, then twice, a third time. Her face went from red to white to a terrifying shade of purple. She just stared at the paper, reading it over and over as if the words might magically change if she looked hard enough. The silence in that room was deafening. I could hear the kitchen clock ticking from the other room, each tick like a hammer against my eardrums. Then her face twisted. She crumpled the will into a tight ball, both hands crushing it, and threw it right at my face. It bounced off my cheek. She started screaming, her voice escalating with every word until it was a piercing shriek. You're lying. There's no way this is real. You must have made fake documents. She kept yelling. There's no way Dad would have hidden something this huge from me for 4 whole years. Her face was getting redder and redder. Dad cleared his throat. Yes, he said, so quietly I barely heard him over Nancy's rage. I knew about the will the whole time. Nancy stopped mid-scream, her mouth hanging open. Her eyes went wide. She stared at him, truly seeing him for the first time in forever. Why? She asked, her voice shaking. Why did you never tell me I've been living in your daughter's house all this time? Dad looked down at his hands, silent. Nancy took a step closer, asked again, louder. Dad mumbled. I thought it would be easier not to mention it. He spoke to the floor, avoiding both our gazes. I figured you'd move out on your own when you turned 25 anyway, and then it wouldn't matter. Nancy's face went from red to purple to this awful, sickly gray. She pressed a hand against the wall as if she needed it to stay standing. Her breathing became fast and shallow. I watched her brain furiously trying to process what this meant. How she'd been decorating, changing, throwing out Mom's things in a house that was never going to be hers. Her whole body seemed to collapse in on itself. She sank hard onto one of the dining chairs she'd bought 2 years ago, the expensive one. Tears started streaming down her face, and her voice turned high and whiny. I invested so much money into this house over 4 years, she wailed. I have receipts for everything. All the furniture, the paint, the renovations. It's not fair. I spent all that money thinking I was fixing up my home. You need to pay me back for all the improvements I made to your property without knowing it wasn't mine. My voice again came out steadier than I expected. I never asked you to throw out Mom's curtains, Nancy, I told her. Or paint over her murals. Or replace all her furniture. You did all of that on your own, without ever asking for my permission. The actual owner's permission. Nancy's breathing hitched. She started making these weird gasping sounds, fanning her face. I can't breathe, she choked. I can't believe this is happening. Dad moved towards her, but she held up a hand, stopping him cold. He tried to put a hand on her shoulder, but she shoved him away so hard he stumbled back a step. You made me look like a complete fool, she shrieked, her voice breaking. In front of everyone at the moving party. I'm so embarrassed. I threw you an eviction party for a house you owned. And I've just been a guest in it this whole time. She covered her face with both hands. Dad softly spoke her name, but she ignored him. All my friends and family were there. I gave that whole speech about you finally growing up. Now everyone will know I was the one who didn't have a clue what was going on. Then Nancy went completely silent and still. She lowered her hands, and her eyes held a cold, hard look. Exactly when do you turn 25? She asked, her voice flat. In 8 weeks, I said. And when does the official ownership transfer happen? On my birthday, I replied. I could see her eyes darting back and forth like she was running calculations in her head. Is there any way to contest it? She asked. Can Dad do anything to change it? Dad shook his head. His voice was resigned. The will is clear and legal, Nancy. There's nothing anyone can do. Nancy pressed her lips into a thin line and said nothing else. She just sat there staring into space, her brain working through every possible angle. The next morning, I woke to an unsettling silence. The master bedroom door was closed and locked. I knocked, called Nancy's name, but got no answer. I found Dad asleep on the couch, still in yesterday's clothes, looking gray and utterly exhausted. The whole house felt wrong, heavy. I made coffee just to have something to do, but couldn't drink it. Every sound seemed too loud. I kept glancing at that closed bedroom door, wondering what Nancy was planning in there. I called Maya, my best friend. She answered on the second ring, and I spilled everything. I'm on my way, she said without hesitation. 45 minutes later, Maya showed up with her camera and a notebook. We started in my room, where Nancy had already packed half my life. Maya took pictures of the storage unit boxes, the ones filled with Mom's things. She wrote down everything Nancy had thrown away or destroyed that I could remember. We went room by room, and I pointed out what used to be there before Nancy's wrecking ball. Maya photographed the gym equipment in Mom's old craft room, the painted-over murals in the hallway. We made lists of all the furniture Nancy had replaced. It took almost 3 hours to document everything. Maya sat down beside me on the couch. You should probably talk to the lawyer who handled your mom's estate, she advised. You need to understand your legal rights and what happens next with the house. I realized I had no vague idea who that lawyer was. I was only 17 when Mom died, and Dad had handled all the legal stuff. I don't even know where to start looking, I told her. She suggested Mom's old papers. We went back up to my room and dug through the boxes of documents I'd saved from Nancy's purge. Buried under bank statements and old tax returns, I found it. A business card with gold lettering, Henderson and Associates, Estate Planning. Evelyn Henderson. I grabbed my phone and dialed before I could second-guess myself. A receptionist answered. I explained who I was, how Mom had been a client 7 years ago. She put me on hold. 30 seconds later, a woman's voice came on the line. I remember your mother's case very well, Evelyn said. I told her everything about Nancy, the house, the will. She went quiet for a moment. I can see you tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, she said. I thanked her, hung up, and for the first time since the confrontation, I felt like I could actually breathe. Maya squeezed my shoulder. I'll come with you if you want. I need to do this alone, I told her. But thank you. She left around 5. I made myself a sandwich, but couldn't eat. The house felt different now. Every room Nancy had changed felt like a violation. Every piece of furniture she bought felt like an insult to Mom's memory. I went to bed early but couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversation with Dad, how he had known this whole time and never said a word. Around 7 that evening, I heard the bedroom door open upstairs. Nancy's footsteps sounded heavier than usual as she came down. I stayed in the kitchen, pretending to be busy on my laptop. She came in wearing a coat, carrying an overnight bag. "I'm going to stay with Heather for a few days," she announced, not looking at me. "I need space to process what you're calling my betrayal." Dad appeared behind her, looking utterly exhausted. He just nodded. Didn't ask her to stay. Didn't try to talk her out of it. Didn't defend me. He just stood there like a statue while she walked out the front door. The silence after she left made me want to scream. I looked at Dad. "How could you just let her leave like that?" He flinched. "She needs time to cool down," he muttered. "That's not what I mean." I exploded. "How could you let her treat me like garbage for 4 years without ever standing up for me?" He flinched again, harder this time, like I'd physically hit him. He sank into a kitchen chair, burying his face in his hands. I stayed standing. Sitting felt like letting him off too easy. "Why didn't you ever tell me about the house?" I asked, my voice laced with hurt and anger. "Why did you let me think we were just living here because it was convenient? Why did you let Nancy believe she had any right to make decisions about a house that belonged to me?" He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "I was embarrassed," he confessed, his voice barely a whisper. "Your mom died when I was almost 50, and I didn't own a home. All my friends had houses, retirement accounts, and I had nothing. When Nancy asked about the house after we got engaged, I just told her it was mine. It was easier than admitting the truth." He paused, his gaze dropping to the table. "I thought you'd move out after college, like Nancy kept saying. Then it wouldn't matter. I never thought she'd want to do massive renovations or that it would become this big of a problem. Did you seriously think I'd just abandon Mom's house?" I asked, incredulous. "I didn't think that far ahead," he admitted. "I just wanted Nancy to see me as successful, stable." "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard," I told him, the words sharp. He nodded. "I know that now." Then he told me something that made everything infinitely worse. "Nancy's been spending money constantly for 4 years," he said, "because she thought we owned the house together. She thought we had this big asset we could borrow against." He swallowed hard. "She bought all that expensive furniture on credit cards. The gym equipment, the renovations, all on credit. She kept saying we could afford it because we had equity in the house." He'd been too scared to tell her the truth. Now they were in serious credit card debt, over $40,000. He'd been using his retirement money to make minimum payments. He had almost nothing left for his own retirement. I just stared at him, trying to process this fresh wave of stupidity and betrayal. "How could you be so stupid?" I whispered. "I know," he said over and over, his voice filled with self-loathing. I know, as if saying it enough times would fix anything. The next morning, I drove to Evelyn Henderson's office downtown. Leather chairs, paintings of sailboats, it was all very official. Evelyn, a woman in her 60s with gray hair pulled into a bun, shook my hand. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said, even though Mom had been gone 7 years. She pulled a thick folder from a cabinet, Mom's complete estate file. She looked genuinely shocked when I told her Dad never informed me about the house inheritance. "He was supposed to tell you when you turned 21, she explained. That was part of the trust terms. I assumed he had done it. I told her I'd only found out last week because Nancy was acting crazy about renovations." Evelyn shook her head. This is a serious breach of his duties as trustee. She explained that while the house transferred officially on my 25th birthday, technically I'd owned it since Mom died. Dad was just the trustee managing it until I came of age. That means Nancy has been living in your house as a guest for 4 years, she stated. Any renovations she did were basically gifts to you as the property owner. She has no legal claim to reimbursement unless she could prove you somehow tricked her into making improvements. Since I was a minor when this all started and didn't even know I owned the house, that would be impossible. Relief washed over me, but also a fresh wave of anger at Dad for putting me in this mess. Evelyn said she needed to bring in her husband because this was veering into property law. She returned with Arthur Henderson, who specialized in just that. He read through some papers, then looked at me. Nancy could potentially try to sue for the cost of her renovations, he said. There are laws about unjust enrichment where someone improves property believing they have a right to it. But your case is different. You were a minor. Your father was the trustee who should have informed Nancy. Since he failed, Nancy's case would be very weak. Any reasonable judge would see you can't be held responsible for your father's lies. He cautioned that didn't mean she wouldn't try. People sue for all kinds of things when they're angry. He asked if I had documented what Nancy had changed or destroyed. Maya and I spent yesterday photographing everything and making lists, I told him. He nodded. That's smart. Arthur advised me to document everything Nancy changed or destroyed and get estimates for the value of Mom's original items. If Nancy tries to sue you for her renovation costs, he explained, you can countersue for the value of what she destroyed. He noted Mom's hand-painted murals alone probably had significant value. The vintage furniture might be worth more than Nancy's modern replacements. He offered to represent me if it came to that. I thanked him, hoping it wouldn't be necessary. He hoped so, too, but warned me to be prepared. People do strange things when they feel humiliated. Nancy just found out she'd been living in her stepdaughter's house for 4 years while trying to force that stepdaughter to move out. That's a pretty big humiliation. I left the office feeling better about my legal position, but worse about everything else. When I got home, Nancy's car was in the driveway. My stomach dropped. I walked in to find Nancy and Heather in the living room, surrounded by boxes of receipts. Heather looked up, her eyes blazing with pure hatred. Nancy has every right to be compensated for the money she invested in good faith into this property, she spat. I said nothing, just stood there watching Nancy meticulously sort receipts into piles, pretending I didn't exist. Heather continued, ranting about how Nancy had poured her heart and money into making the house beautiful, how she'd worked so hard to update everything, how it wasn't fair she was being punished for trying to make a home. I wanted to shout that it was never Nancy's home to begin with, but Arthur's advice echoed in my head, document everything. Don't engage. Be prepared, Nancy finally looked up. Her laptop was open beside her. She turned the screen towards me. It was a spreadsheet, precise dates, amounts, descriptions, every single thing she'd bought or paid for over 4 years. New furniture, gym equipment, paint, appliances. The total at the bottom, $85,467. This is what I've invested into your property, she said, her voice cold and flat, without knowing it was mine. I demand you pay me back before your birthday. If you don't, I'll take you to court for unjust enrichment. I looked at the spreadsheet, then at her. I'd be happy to discuss compensation, I said, right after you compensate me for everything of Mom's that you destroyed. I walked to my room, grabbed the folder Maya and I had put together. Inside were printed photos of Mom's hand-painted murals before Nancy covered them. Photos of the vintage furniture, the custom curtains Mom had sewn herself. I'd even found the original fabric receipts. Maya had helped me research similar vintage pieces online, and we had appraisal estimates. The curtains alone were worth $3,000. The murals, at least $5,000 to recreate. The vintage mid-century furniture was worth over $15,000. I walked back into the living room and dropped the folder on the coffee table right next to Nancy's spreadsheet. I have documentation, too, I stated. Every single thing you destroyed or threw away that belonged to my mom. We can both get professional appraisals and see who actually owes money to whom. Nancy snatched the folder, flipping through the pages. Her face grew redder with each photo, each price estimate. Heather leaned over her shoulder, her mouth falling open as she saw the numbers. Suddenly, Heather stood up, pointing a finger at me. "You ungrateful brat," she screamed. "You should be thanking Nancy for improving this old, outdated house instead of complaining about worthless junk. Nancy worked so hard to make this place modern and beautiful, and all you care about is some old furniture and ugly paintings." I just stood there, silent. Maya, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, finally stood up and walked over. "Heather," she said calmly, "you need to leave. This is between her, Nancy, and her dad." Heather spun around. "Who are you? Why are you here?" "I'm her friend, and I'm here to support her." Heather scoffed. "This is family business. You need to mind your own business." Dad, still slumped on the couch, looked up. Maya looked at him. "Do you agree Heather should leave so we can talk about this privately?" Dad nodded slowly. "Yeah, Heather should probably go." Nancy's head snapped up. She stared at Dad as if he'd just slapped her. She started crying again. "I can't believe my own husband is turning against me," she sobbed. "Everyone's ganging up on me when all I've done is try to make a nice home for my family." Heather grabbed her purse. "Call me later, Nan," she said, giving me one more nasty look before slamming the front door so hard the windows rattled. Nancy stood up, gathering her receipts and laptop. "You've made your choice," she told Dad, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "I hope you're happy." She walked to the bedroom and shut the door. I heard the lock click. Maya let out a long breath. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I don't know," I admitted. Dad still sat there, head in his hands, unmoving. I picked up Mom's folder, looking at the photos again. Seeing all the things Nancy had destroyed made me feel sick. The next week was the worst of my life. No one spoke. Nancy stayed in the bedroom, emerging only when Dad wasn't around. When I did see her, she was always with her phone, snapping pictures of the new couch, the dining table, the gym equipment in Mom's old craft room, her fancy coffee maker. She was building her case, documenting everything she'd bought. Dad moved like a ghost, going to work, then sitting in front of the TV, not really watching. He looked older, more tired. I tried to talk to him a few times, but he just mumbled, "I don't know what to say." On Thursday, Evelyn called. Nancy's lawyer had contacted her office wanting a meeting to discuss property compensation and tenant rights. Evelyn said we should meet with Arthur present to protect my interests. We scheduled it for the following Tuesday. When I hung up, I felt like throwing up. This was really happening. Nancy was actually going to sue me. At work the next day, Cody, my coworker, noticed I was distracted, messing up orders. During our break, he asked if I was okay. I gave him the short version. His eyes widened when I explained about the house and Nancy trying to sue me. He said his parents went through something similar with his grandmother's house. His aunt thought she owned it, but it belonged to his mom. It got really ugly, he warned. Took almost 2 years to settle. Family property fights can drag on forever and get super nasty. That made me feel even worse. Tuesday arrived. I met Evelyn and Arthur at their office. Nancy showed up with her own lawyer, a slick, confident-looking man in an expensive suit. Nancy wouldn't even look at me. Her face was cold, blank. Her lawyer started immediately, detailing all the money Nancy had spent, demanding compensation. He claimed Nancy had tenant rights due to her long stay and investment. Arthur, calm as ever, explained Nancy was never a tenant because she never paid me rent. He pointed out her husband, my dad, was the trustee who should have informed her. Nancy's lawyer argued Dad's failure meant she improved the property under false pretenses. Evelyn then spoke up, gently reminding them I was only 17 when Nancy moved in, a minor for the first year, and dependent on Dad for the next 3. She had no way to tell Nancy anything herself. Evelyn stated, if anyone misled Nancy, it was her father, not her. Nancy's lawyer scribbled notes, saying they'd need to think about that. The meeting dragged on for another hour, back and forth. Finally, Nancy's lawyer announced they were prepared to file a lawsuit for $85,000, plus extra for emotional pain. Arthur countered that we would countersue for the value of everything Nancy destroyed and for making unauthorized changes to my property. The meeting ended with nothing solved. Nancy walked out without a word, her lawyer trailing behind. I sat there, utterly drained. I drove home, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Lawyers, courtrooms, telling a judge about my family problems. It felt surreal. When I pulled into the driveway, Dad's truck was there. I sat in my car for a few minutes, trying to calm down. The house felt different, not like home anymore, even though legally it was mine. I found Dad at the kitchen table, head in his hands, looking smaller, older. Papers were spread in front of him. I sat opposite him. Neither of us spoke for a minute. Then he started without looking up. I've been using my retirement savings to pay off Nancy's credit cards, he confessed. She kept spending, and I kept thinking she'd stop, but she never did. He lifted his head slightly, his voice hollow. I have less than $30,000 left in my retirement account now. I'm 52 years old. The way he said it made my stomach ache. How much did she spend? I asked. I don't even know the total anymore, he mumbled. Too much. Way too much. I took a deep breath. Did you know Nancy was planning to take out a loan against the house? Dad finally looked up, his eyes red. He admitted he knew she wanted to, but he didn't think she'd actually do it. I kept putting her off, hoping she'd forget, he said. And I definitely didn't know she was planning to spend $300,000. That's completely insane. Nancy must have heard us because suddenly she was standing in the kitchen doorway. I hadn't heard her come downstairs. I'm done trying to negotiate with you, she announced, her voice cold and flat. I'm filing the lawsuit next week. I've already talked to my lawyer. Then she turned to Dad. You need to choose. You can either support my case or support her, but you can't have it both ways anymore. Dad opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He just sat there looking back and forth between us. Nancy's face flushed. You weak man, she screamed. You let your dead wife's memory control your life for 7 years. You're going to lose everything now because you can't stand up to your own daughter. Something snapped inside me. I stood up. Nancy, you're the one who tried to erase every trace of my mom from her own house. Maybe if you'd shown some respect for her memory, we wouldn't be in this situation. Nancy crossed the kitchen in 3 furious steps and slapped me hard across the face. The sound echoed in the quiet house. My cheek burned. My eyes instantly watered. Dad jumped up so fast his chair clattered backward. Nancy, he roared, his voice shaking, but finally standing up straight. That is completely unacceptable. Nancy grabbed her purse. I'm going to stay with my parents. She hissed at Dad. You think real hard about whose side you want to be on. Then she was gone. We heard her car start and pull out of the driveway. Dad sank back down, burying his face in his hands again. I'm so sorry, he whispered, for everything. For not telling you about the house when you turned 21. For letting Nancy treat you badly for 4 years. For being too scared to stand up to her until now. I told him I needed to know the absolute truth about everything. That's when he admitted Nancy had been pressuring him to add her name to the house deed for the past year, claiming it was only fair. He kept putting her off, but he never told her why. Because it wasn't his house to share. It was mine. Everything clicked into place. Nancy's aggressive push to get me out in the last 6 months. The moving party. The 30-day deadline. She wanted to establish the house as theirs before I turned 25. She must have sensed something was wrong with how Dad avoided her requests about the deed. Maybe she even suspected the truth. That's why she was in such a hurry to get rid of me and start those renovations. If she could get me out and change everything about the house before my birthday, maybe she thought she could claim it was theirs. I sat there feeling sick and utterly exhausted. Dad went upstairs, and I heard his bedroom door close. I didn't move from the kitchen table for a long time. My phone buzzed. It was Maya. "Are you okay?" I texted back that I wasn't, and she said she was coming over. 20 minutes later, she let herself in with a spare key. Given her freshman year, she found me in Mom's old craft room, now Nancy's gym, sitting on the floor next to the weight bench, crying. Maya sat down beside me silently. Then she started talking, gently reminding me how hard this was, but how I needed to protect myself legally. "Nancy has shown over and over that she'll do whatever it takes to get what she wants," Maya said firmly. She reminded me of all Nancy had done. Changing locks, charging rent, that horrible moving party, trying to take out a loan against my house. You can't let Nancy bully you into giving up what your mom left you just because it feels bad to fight with family. Maya stayed with me late that night. We went through every single box Nancy had packed. I pulled out all of Mom's things and put them back where they belonged in my room. The craft room felt different now. Every piece of gym equipment looked like an insult. Maya helped me take photos of everything. The weight bench, the treadmill, the yoga mats. "You need evidence of what Nancy's done to the house," she insisted, "in case things get worse." I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about Nancy's cold calculation, how she'd been planning this for months, maybe even years. The apartment listings, the moving party, the renovation plans, all leading up to forcing me out so she could claim the house before I turned 25. Dad stayed in his room the whole night. I heard him moving around, but he never came down. The next morning, I called Arthur's office before work. I asked if I could meet with him alone. He had an opening at 3 that afternoon. I went to work but couldn't focus. Cody noticed. "Family stuff," I said, and he didn't push. At 3, I drove to Arthur's office. He had a corner office with huge windows overlooking the city. He shook my hand and gestured to a leather chair. He pulled out a legal pad. "Tell me everything that's happened since the revelation," he said. I recounted it all. Nancy's meltdown, the slap, her threats of lawsuits. Arthur took notes, nodding occasionally. When I finished, he leaned back, tapping his pen against the pad. "Nancy's case is weak," he confirmed. "Because your dad was the trustee who failed in his duty to inform her. But that doesn't mean she won't try to drag this out, make it expensive and painful." He explained that people like Nancy don't care about winning. They care about punishing. She'll probably file the lawsuit just to cost you money, legal fees, and stress. Even if she loses, she'll feel like she won something by making you suffer. "What are my options?" I asked, my voice small. "We can let her sue and fight it in court," he said. "You'd almost certainly win, but it would be expensive. Or," he suggested, "we could try mediation. See if we can reach some kind of settlement that avoids court entirely." He thought that if we could get Nancy to drop her lawsuit in exchange for me not countersuing for the destroyed items, that might be the cleanest resolution. I felt sick at the idea of letting Nancy off without paying for what she'd destroyed. Mom's curtains, the murals, the furniture that had been in my family for generations. Arthur saw my face. He leaned forward. I understand how you feel, he said gently. But a court battle could cost more in legal fees than you'd ever recover from Nancy. Plus, it would completely destroy what's left of your relationship with your dad. He paused. Sometimes the smart choice isn't the satisfying choice. I asked about legal fees. $20,000 to $30,000 minimum, he estimated. Maybe more if Nancy drags it out. I didn't have that kind of money. I just started my job. Arthur said he could work out a payment plan, but it would still be a huge financial burden for years. I left his office feeling worse than when I'd arrived. The whole drive home, I thought about Mom's things all gone, and Nancy wouldn't have to pay for any of it. When I got home, Dad was in the living room. "Can we talk?" he asked. I walked past him to my room. I wasn't ready. An hour later, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me. It was Nancy's mom, Danielle. She asked if I would meet her and Nancy's dad for coffee the next day. Why? I asked, suspicious. We just want to talk, she said. I agreed, curious. We arranged to meet near my work at noon. Maya warned me to be careful, that they might be trying to manipulate me, but I had to know. The next day, I arrived 15 minutes early. Danielle and Rupert were already there, tucked away at a corner table. Danielle waved me over. Rupert stood to shake my hand. They both looked uncomfortable. We ordered coffee. Danielle started. They'd had no idea about the house until Nancy told them last week. We're embarrassed by Nancy's behavior, she said. Rupert nodded. We raised her better than this. Danielle added that Nancy had always been entitled and impulsive with money, which was why she'd been married twice before Dad. I just listened. Rupert said they were going to talk to Nancy about dropping the lawsuit. We don't think she has a case, and we don't want to see her humiliate herself in court. Danielle added, we also don't want to see our family torn apart over money and pride. Nancy's our daughter, and we love her, but we can see she's wrong about this. I told them I appreciated their concern, but Nancy was an adult who made her own choices. Danielle reached across the table, touching my hand. We understand that, she said softly. We're not asking you to forgive Nancy or pretend everything is fine. We just want to prevent this from getting worse. I thought about Arthur's advice about mediation. I'll agree to mediation if Nancy is willing, I said. I don't want to spend my 25th birthday in court fighting over my mom's house. Rupert looked visibly relieved. He said he'd talk to Nancy that night. We finished our coffee. Danielle hugged me before they left, whispering, I'm so sorry for everything Nancy put you through. 2 weeks went by. Silence from Nancy and her parents. Dad still moved like a ghost. Then Arthur called. Nancy's lawyer had agreed to mediation. We scheduled it for the following Thursday. The day of mediation, I called in sick to work. Maya wanted to come, but Arthur said only parties and their lawyers could attend. I drove to the mediator's office. Nancy was already there with her lawyer, a sharp-looking woman. Nancy wouldn't look at me. Her face was cold, blank. Dad arrived a few minutes later, looking utterly exhausted. The mediator, an older man named Gerald, explained the process. We'd each present our side, then he'd help us compromise. Nancy's lawyer went first, detailing all the money Nancy had spent, demanding compensation. Arthur countered with documentation of everything Nancy had destroyed without permission. Back and forth for 3 hours. Gerald kept trying to find middle ground. Finally, Nancy's lawyer quietly admitted her case wasn't as strong as they'd hoped. The mediator worked with us to draft an agreement. Nancy would drop her lawsuit, and I wouldn't sue for the destroyed items. Nancy and Dad could continue living in the house, but they had to be out within 6 months of my 25th birthday. Nancy couldn't make any further changes to the house. She had to return Mom's craft room to its original purpose by removing all the gym equipment, and Nancy had to pay me $500 per month in rent, starting immediately, until they moved out. Nancy's lawyer showed her the agreement. Nancy stared at it for a long time. Then, her hand shaking, she picked up the pen and signed her name. Her signature looked shaky and small, nothing like her usual bold handwriting. She pushed the papers back across the table to the mediator, then looked directly at me for the first time in hours. "I will never forgive you," she said, her voice ice cold and flat, "for humiliating me like this and destroying my marriage." I met her eyes. "I didn't destroy anything, Nancy," I said, my voice unwavering. "I just told you the truth about who owned the house you'd been living in for 4 years. Her face went red again, and she opened her mouth, but her lawyer put a hand on her arm, and she stayed quiet. The mediator collected the signed papers, shook everyone's hand. "I hope this will be the end of it," he said. Nancy stood up so fast her chair scraped. She walked out without looking back. Her lawyer followed. Arthur stayed to talk to the mediator about filing the agreement. I just sat there, numb and exhausted. Dad hadn't moved from his chair. He was staring at the table like the wood grain was the most interesting thing he'd ever seen. As Arthur finished up, Dad finally looked at me. "Can we talk privately sometime soon?" he asked quietly, his voice rough as if he hadn't used it in days. I looked at him, really looked at him. He looked so tired. New lines around his eyes, his skin a gray color that scared me a little. He'd lost weight. His shirt collar looked loose. The whole situation had aged him in just a few weeks, older than when Mom died, even. "Okay," I said. "We can talk." He nodded. "I'll call you to set something up." Then he left through a different door than Nancy. The next week felt strange. Quiet. Nancy stayed in the bedroom. Dad slept on the couch. I went to work, tried to act normal, though Cody kept giving me concerned looks. Maya texted constantly. The gym equipment was still in Mom's craft room, and I walked past it every day feeling angry all over again. Finally, Dad called. He asked to meet for breakfast on Saturday at a diner across town, away from the house, away from Nancy. I got there first. Dad showed up 10 minutes later, looking even more tired than at the mediation. He ordered coffee, didn't even glance at the menu. We sat in silence until our drinks arrived. Then Dad started talking. He and Nancy were probably going to separate, he said. She couldn't get past the fact that he'd lied to her for 4 years about the house. Every conversation turned into her screaming about how he'd made her look stupid, how everyone must be laughing at her. She'd called her sister, her parents, told everyone how he'd betrayed her. She kept saying she'd given up 4 years of her life living in someone else's house like a tenant. Dad looked down at his coffee cup. "I can't blame her for being angry," he admitted, "even though she's taking it too far." The waitress came back. We ordered food we didn't really want. Dad waited until she left, then continued. He should have told Nancy the truth from the beginning. He was ashamed of not being a homeowner at 48. All his friends owned houses, and he was living in his dead wife's childhood home that belonged to his daughter. He liked feeling like a provider, even though it was based on a lie. When Nancy wanted to redecorate, he let her because it made him feel like he had something to offer her, like he was giving her a home, even though it wasn't his to give. He apologized for putting me in this position. He apologized for letting Nancy treat me badly for so long. "I was a coward," he said, his voice cracking. "I understand if you're angry with me." I watched him. This weird mix of emotions swirled inside me. Part of me wanted to hug him, tell him it was okay. But a much bigger part was still deeply hurt and angry. "I do forgive you, Dad," I said. "But I'm also really hurt that you chose Nancy's feelings over my well-being for 4 years." I reminded him how I'd watched her throw out Mom's things, paint over Mom's murals, turn Mom's craft room into a gym, and he just let it happen. He let her charge me rent in my own house. He let her lock me out, lock up the food. He sat there silently while she told everyone I was refusing to grow up. Dad's eyes got watery. He nodded. I understand if you need time and space from me, he said. I'll respect whatever boundaries you need to set. I just wanted you to know I'm sorry, and I love you. Our food came. Neither of us ate much. We picked at our plates until Dad paid the bill and we left. 2 months felt like forever and no time at all. The house stayed tense and quiet. Nancy started packing bit by bit, boxing up her clothes, shoes, gym equipment. Dad helped her in silence. They barely spoke. I stayed in my room or at Maya's apartment most evenings. Work became my escape. Then finally, my birthday came. I woke up that morning, 25 years old, and the house was officially mine. Evelyn had called the week before to set up an appointment to sign the final papers. I drove there feeling weirdly shaky. Arthur was there, too. Everything was ready. Evelyn walked me through each document, explaining what I was signing. The house was transferring from the trust into my name. No conditions, no trustee. I signed my name over and over. When it was done, Evelyn shook my hand. Congratulations, she said. Your mom would be proud of you. I almost cried right there. The house was mine. Really mine. My childhood home with all its memories, officially and legally mine. Maya insisted on throwing me a birthday party that evening. She invited a few college friends, bought a cake, decorations. She came over early to help me set up in the living room. Nancy stayed in her bedroom, door closed the entire time. I could hear her moving around, but she never came out. People started arriving around 7 o'clock. The house filled with noise and laughter for the first time in months. Dad showed up around 8, carrying a birthday card. He gave it to me, said, "Happy birthday." Talked to a few people for maybe 15 minutes, then said he should go. The card held a long letter apologizing again, hoping we could rebuild our relationship. He tucked 2 $200 bills inside, his way of paying back some of the rent Nancy had charged me. After he left, I put the card away and tried to enjoy the rest of the party. Maya made everyone sing happy birthday. I blew out the candles, wishing things could just feel normal again. The next month, Nancy and Dad seriously started apartment hunting. I'd hear them on the phone with landlords, see listings on the kitchen counter. Nancy kept insisting on places that were far too expensive. I'd overhear Dad trying to explain they needed to be realistic about what they could afford now. She'd get angry, saying she wasn't going to live in some dump after 4 years in a nice house. Their arguments grew louder, more frequent. One night, I heard Nancy screaming, "This is all your fault. If you'd just been honest from the start, we could have planned better." Dad's voice was quieter, but I heard him saying they needed to work together to find something. Eventually, they settled on a 2-bedroom apartment across town. Smaller, cheaper than Nancy wanted, but better than what Dad thought they could afford. They signed a lease starting in 3 months. I started reclaiming the house slowly, 1 room at a time. The hallway was first. I found old photos of Mom's murals I'd saved and used them as references to repaint her designs. It took me 2 weeks, working evenings. The colors weren't exactly right, and my painting skills were nowhere near Mom's. But seeing her flowers and vines back on the walls made me feel like she was there with me. Next, I tackled the craft room. I made Nancy move all her gym equipment to the garage. Once empty, I painted the walls back to Mom's soft yellow. I bought some basic craft supplies and set up a small workspace. I didn't know if I'd actually use it for crafting, but having it back to its original purpose felt incredibly important. Each change I made felt like honoring Mom's memory while also making the space truly mine. the house was starting to feel like home again instead of a battleground. Cody from work had been asking how I was doing for weeks. He noticed I was stressed. One day during lunch, he asked if I wanted to grab coffee sometime outside of work. I was surprised to realize I was interested. We went to a coffee shop near my house that Saturday and talked for 2 hours. He told me about his family, his hobbies, and listened without judgment when I mentioned the house situation, saying his own family had drama, too. We started seeing each other casually after that. He was patient with the fact that I was dealing with family stuff, not fully emotionally available yet. We'd get coffee, see movies, or just walk around talking. It was nice to have something normal and simple in my life. He never pushed for more than I was ready to give, and he made me laugh, which I hadn't done much of lately. About a month after Cody and I started seeing each other, the doorbell rang on a Saturday afternoon while I was repainting the hallway. I opened the door, paint still on my hands, to find Heather standing there looking uncomfortable. She asked if we could talk. I almost said no, but something in her face made me step aside. She sat on the couch and apologized for how she acted at the mediation and before that. Nancy's always been like this, she admitted, entitled and dramatic. Our whole family knew it, but we just went along with it because it was easier than dealing with her tantrums. Heather explained their parents had been bailing Nancy out of bad decisions since she was a teenager. She'd been married twice before Dad, both times to men with money, who eventually got tired of her spending habits. I felt bad for not speaking up when Nancy was treating you badly, Heather said, because I knew it was wrong. But she's my sister, and family loyalty felt important at the time. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and listened. Heather shifted. Nancy and Dad are definitely getting divorced, she confirmed. She's already met someone new at her gym. Some guy who owns a car dealership, drives a fancy sports car. Heather looked embarrassed. Nancy's been seeing this guy for at least a month, maybe longer. She's moved on so fast, it makes me ashamed of my own sister. She wanted me to know that not everyone in their family thought Nancy was right about the house. Her parents felt terrible. Rupert had even said Nancy got what she deserved for being so pushy and entitled. Heather stayed for another 20 minutes of awkward small talk before she left. I felt weird about the whole conversation, but also a little relieved that someone from Nancy's side had acknowledged how messed up everything had been. Months after my birthday, moving day finally arrived. I took the day off work to be there, even though I didn't really want to witness it. Nancy and Dad had packed everything over the past few weeks. The apartment they'd rented was small, plain, nothing like the house Nancy had been living in. Movers showed up at 8 a.m. Nancy directed them around without looking at me once, pointing at things, telling them to be careful with her expensive gym equipment. Dad moved slowly through the rooms, looking tired and older than I remembered. He stopped in the hallway where I'd repainted Mom's murals and stared at them for a long time before moving on. The whole process took about 6 hours. Nobody said much. When the truck was finally loaded, Dad came over and hugged me tight. "I'll call you soon," he whispered. "We'll figure out how to stay in touch. I promise we'll work on fixing our relationship, even though I know it will take time." Nancy walked right past me to her car without a single word. She got in and drove away, following the moving truck. Dad gave me one last sad smile and left, too. I stood in the driveway watching them go, feeling both relieved and sad at the same time. 6 months after I told Nancy the truth about the house, everything had changed. I'd bought new furniture, pieces I picked up myself, comfortable and mine, not Nancy's modern, expensive stuff. Mom's craft room was completely restored with yellow walls and a workspace I'd set up with supplies. I'd even started learning to paint, hoping to try doing murals like Mom used to. The whole house felt peaceful now. Truly mine in a way it never was before. Dad and I met for dinner once a month at a restaurant halfway between our places. We talked carefully at first about safe topics, but slowly we were getting more comfortable with each other again. He told me about his new apartment and his job, and I told him about work and Cody. Our relationship was healing, but it would never be quite the same as before Nancy. I'd heard through Heather that Nancy and Dad's divorce was moving forward, and Nancy was already engaged to the car dealership guy after only dating him for 4 months. Heather texted me updates sometimes, and we'd actually become friendly, which was strange, but nice. I was dating Cody seriously now, and he'd been over to the house a bunch of times. He loved it, understood why it meant so much to me. He never pushed me to talk about the Nancy situation, but he listened when I wanted to. Maya had helped me plant a memorial garden in the backyard for Mom with roses and daisies and lavender, all Mom's favorite flowers. Every time I looked at it from the kitchen window, I felt like I'd finally done right by her memory. The whole experience had been painful and messy. And there were still days when I felt angry at Dad or sad about how things turned out. But I'd stood up for myself. I protected what Mom left me. So tell me, what would you have done in my place? Have you ever had to fight for something that was rightfully yours against people you thought were family? I'd really love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.